session is to present to you the AD migration guide that we created to help you convert all your existing ADs and SBs against the new Adsb feature. So the first thing that you should have in mind is that, first of all, when you do the upgrade to the 21.3, the new Adsb feature can not be activated right away, meaning that you can decide to switch to the new release 21.3 and keep the old Adsb feature the time for you to analyze all your existing ADs and do the preparation work that we're gonna introduce today. All right, so I know we had some question about that, so be assured that, again, you can start the 21.3 without the new Adsb feature, and it can be activated after. All right, so for the presentation, I'm going to ask everyone to keep yourself muted, and we're going to keep times at the end to answer any questions you may have. All right. So I think you can see my screen with the presentation in the background. That's okay. Just let me. All right. So the very first step, because you, I guess, all know that by reviewing the release note and the previous webinar we did, the main change between the old Adsb feature and the new one is that now we manage all ADs with two steps. We have a general definition from the very main screen of Aircraft Maintenance Manager. And then based on your applicable criteria, the system will generate instances to any of the airframe on which the AD should be applied to, as well as for the component. So the very first step is for you to prepare all your existing ADs. Since we know now that from one definition, you're gonna produce several instances to track the specific details on an execution of an AD related to a given component, to a given airframe, it is crucial for you to have legacy information accurate, meaning to avoid any double entries, to avoid false entry, like you have an AD that is supposed to be linked to an airframe, and for some reason you have a serial number attached to it, which means that it's been defined in your system being linked to a component, which is wrong. So this is all the kind of analysis you should do prior to convert to the new Adsb feature. So once all the data are clean, I'm going to show you what tool we produced to help you migrate your ADs. All right, note that here the AD migration is not reversible, meaning that, as I said, you can start with the old Adsb feature, but once you will start using the new one, you won't be able to revert it back to the old. All right, so this is why it's very important, and this is also why we decided to do this webinar for you today. So as I said, the very first step is to analyze your existing information. So to do this action, you're going to open your 21.3.1, which, by the way, you can see right now that is not yet activated in terms of new Adsb feature. And under the menu aircraft history data, fleet data, you're going to be able to look for all your existing Adsb all across your fleet. It can take few seconds as I'm doing a wide search, meaning for all aircraft, all ADs. Oh, and by the way, I'm recording the session. So after the meeting, we're going to be able to send you the video related to it. All right, so the next step, because we are focusing on the Adsb analysis, is to select the view 80s and to trigger the search. So here are my, yeah, did you have a question? No? Okay. So here you can see I have around 4,000 records. So these are all entries that have been flagged as an ADSB, well defined under the AD Manager previous version. All right, so from there, the idea is to export that file on Excel and start using Excel to perform your analysis. So we have the time for it to do it. We have here flagged some typical problems you may end up with. So first of all, for any AD that should be related to an airframe, what you can do to analyze the consistency of your information is to check if this AD that is supposed to be related to an aircraft has a serial number field on your record. In that case, it would mean that there's been a mistake and you can correct it right from that screen. So I'm going to show you from this fleet data. If you double click on an entry, you will enter directly the definition of it, and you can make the changes if you need to. So let's have a look to the generated Excel file. I will recommend you to perform two preliminary actions in order to help you managing this Excel file. First, it's in regard to this column here. The system is adding a suffix at the end of the AD number with a slash. So in order for me to being able to filter this file easily, I'm doing this at first, converting the type of the cell of the column, into a text field, just to make sure the system won't recognize my number as a date, for example. That can be sometimes annoying. So here it's now in text, and with a find replace, I'm going to simply remove the suffix with a replace blank. All right. And I'm going to do same thing because I know I have some with slash only. All right. So then from this file, well, you're going to now use all the Excel capability to help you looking at the information that you need to correct. For example, I'm just giving you this tip. One of my action to do this analysis on my hand would be to, just removing the GoToMeeting. All right, would be to go through a pivot table and to start using the pivot table to review it. So I would put my component AD number as a row along with the registration on the other side. And I will ask the number of ADs related to an aircraft to check if I do not have double entries, for example. So here I can see per aircraft if my count is more than one, which is not supposed to. And you know that you can filter also on that count value. Wait a minute, right there, greater than 1, for example. And right there, the system is showing me all the ADs related to a same aircraft that have been entered several times. So it does not mean at the first glance that it's a mistake, because maybe you have entered several times the same AD to track a particular action, but it could be. So for example, if I have a look to this aircraft C-33, I can see that I have 2 times the AD 2005-14.11. So now I can have a look to it under the system. And so I can filter on my aircraft C-33, and then look for that AD 2005-14-11 and search. So right there, I see 2 times the same AD. If I want to have additional information on it, I simply double click on it. And so I can see that this AD here apparently is supposed to be true for a component. This one has no component related to it. And the other entry has a component related to it, and it's the same description. Let's check the perform time just to make sure it's a real double entry. Yeah, that's exactly the same one. So in that case, I would consider, for example, that this entry here that has no tracking with the related component is supposed to be wrong. So I can delete it from there and keep the one that I supposed is the good one. So this is a first step of analysis. We can see something else. For example, with, let me check if I see that. I'm just finding another example for you. Let's use it as a filter here. So you see, I'm not sure if you are familiar with pivot table, but it can be really interesting. Let's have a look to this airframe too. All right, in that case, I see this airframe 2 is available under 2 aircraft. Let's have a look to it. So first, I'm gonna use the all aircraft, because now the analysis is reversed, meaning that I'm gonna simply focus on this AD here. All right, so under the C-9, I have a limit to 150. And under C-4, my limit is 200. So it means I had a mistake about the definition of that limit. And always keep in mind that since we are using a single general definition, of course, you should have all your existing instances having the same general definition, same description, same number, same limit, etc. Otherwise, the system will consider that is two different definition, and you will start having issues since it will still be the same number. All right. So again, the first step for you when you hand on a situation like this is to make sure which entry is correct and to correct it if it's needed. So here I could switch back the limit to 200, for example. So again, we try to insist on the potential issues you may find, but on an ideal point of view, if you did your AD management correctly, you should not have a lot of mistakes. However, we all human, you know, and we know that it can happen. So once this first step of analysis is done, so for an aircraft or even for ADs related to component. So a good way to find that is that usually if your AD is supposed to be linked to a component, it should have a serial number defined on it. So this is a way also for you to spot all component related ADs and then to start doing the analysis again. Or one comment as well, when you are under the fleet data, if you want to be able to double click on the entry and open the related AD screen, make sure that the aircraft related to that entry is set under the select aircraft to monitor. If you don't have here checked the monitor box, you won't be able to do a double click and open the AD content to make your corrections. All right. So for example, if I have an entry on C16 here, the way I'm set up right now won't allow me to open the AD. If I check that box, now I will be able to navigate to it. All right. So that's mainly it. I will suggest you to take time to read, of course, this guide and to join us if you need any support during this preliminary step. And once you have a clean data entries, I would say, you would be ready to migrate all your ADs. So that's exactly the time where you're gonna call us and you're gonna ask us to activate the new Adsb management feature, which will enable this menu here. And from there, you're gonna have an access to an AD migration tool that we implemented and incorporated into that version. All right, so I'm gonna now activate the new Adsb feature. So as you can see, it is now activated. And under it, you have access to the classic menu AD definition. So that would be what you're going to use on a day-to-day point of view. And the first aspect is to use the migration tool, as I said, to convert all your ADs. So this migration tool has several panels, and it respects the main logic we have all across the system. So you have a search feature at the top. You have a first panel to browse all your existing AD instances, which are not linked yet to an AD definition. Well, just to make sure, I'm sure you do understand it, just to make sure everyone has no issues with that definition of general versus instances. It's like a part number and all its items you have in inventory manager. You have the part number, which is containing the general definition of the part, and related to that same part number, you have several tracking number, meaning instances, related to it to track the very specific details of that item. So here we did implement the same logic for the ADs. So general definition, and based on the applicable criteria, the system will allow you to track specificities on a component or an aircraft. So at that panel here, you see all the existing instances. And at the bottom, you see a few of the definition I already created in the past. All right, so the very first step is to start browsing all your instances. As I said, you can relate to any filter to ease your work. And if I do work on the example I showed you, we could start with the AD number 2005-14-11. So here are all the instances for that AD that I have all across my aircraft. And I know that I touched the one related to the C33. So I'm going to use that AD here that I corrected as a definition. All right. So I will then use the create AD definition from selected AD instance. Yes. All right. Now my definition has been created. From that point, I can edit this entry and make sure all the general information are correct. All right. The applicability field, in that case, it's a simple text box if you want to enter any information that will help identify this AD. But then, as I said, you're going to be able to use the applicable criteria to push new instances. But let's consider that this AD definition is accurate. Now that I have that AD definition available, what I would be supposed to do is to link and create all the existing instances to that definition. So if I want to do that, I will switch my search from AD instance to AD definition, filter by AD definition, which is already true because I still have the number here. And I can select all the existing entries at once, select the definition I want, and use the button link selected AD instance to selected AD definition. So let's do this. All right. So now all instances have been linked to that definition. And as you can see, in order for you to avoid any mistake, once instances are defined on a definition, are linked to a definition, you won't see it again under that same menu, meaning it's done. So you can switch to the new one. So let's have a look to what the system has generated for that AD. And we're gonna have a review at the same time of the new AD module. So I'm gonna close this, go back to the AD definition, and let's check this 2005-14-11. So if I double click or hit edit button, I'm back to the definition fields. If I use the consult, I will be able to directly have a look to that AD. So as you can see here, that AD has been linked to several instances to track it under each aircraft that is supposed to have it. You also see that from that new AD module, from a one AD without having to dive into any aircraft, you can monitor the status of that AD for each of the aircraft to which it's applied. Here, I happened having some mistake because this AD was supposed to be linked to a component, and I left some criteria related to an aircraft. So in that case, it means that I would need to update that AD to correct it. So, sorry, I'm gonna edit it. If I have to add additional applicable criteria, I can also use this component filter. In the case, it's an AD related to a component, and you can see the different filter you have available. You can filter by any component name all across your fleet, by models, by part number, and by serial number. So for example, if I select that part number and apply the filter, then I just hit the create instance and the system will add this instance to that AD definition. So same logic, for example, now if we talk about the AD airframe 2, I can see here that I have twice that AD on C4 and C9. And they are supposed to be the same. So I will use the C9 and create an AD definition from it. Now that I have it, same thing, search AD definition, filter by AD, and select all before linking it to your definition. All right, and keep in mind that, of course, if you are sure that you have did your preliminary job accurately and every entries are accurate, you can also select everything at once. Of course, it will take a long time, and decide to create a definition per instance. In that case, you may end up having several times the same definition, so it will ask you to delete the false entries at the end. So again, it depends on how you did your analysis and how you are the most comfortable with at the end. But just to explain that is feasible. You are not forced to do it one by one. You can do it you can do several IDs at once. All right. So, oops, sorry. So here I have my AD airframe tool. Same thing. We can check that the migration worked because now I have this single definition applicable on the C-4 and C-9. All right, and keep in mind as well that even though we made a feature that you can navigate through it under the main menu, of course, you keep finding the entry under the related aircraft. So you still have your aircraft ID now at the top and component ID at the bottom. And when you double click on it, you have the last performed time and access to the values like you had in the past. We have something new about the status. Now, if you have an AD that you set as not applicable for any reason, the color of the status of that AD will change to, it will be grayed out. So let me show you that. Yes. You see, green, it's fine. Yellow, warning. Red, overdue, as you all know. And now you have an additional color, which is the gray one, just to help you flagging the one that not applicable to that particular airframe. If you want to switch it back to applicable, you won't be able to select that while the AD is not active. Because what we do when you say that an AD is not applicable is that we deactivate it. So if you want to make it applicable, you have first to activate it. Of course, you do not lose any past entries, and set it back to applicable. So I went naturally across the presentation, even if I didn't reopen it, but we browse every aspect of it. Of course, you have a lot of details under the guide. So again, read it carefully and review it, and do not hesitate to reach us out if you have any questions. So I guess for the presentation of this AD migration, it is done now. So I'm gonna unmute everyone or you can unmute yourself. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me.
Cedric, if you have an AD that you're currently tracking against the airframe, but it's going to have to go against the component because you have multiple components on that airframe, how are you able to easily do that?
Yep. So let's take an example on that C-9. So just to answer the question and make it clear, you have multiple components which are supposed to be tracked with, well, with the same AD. So let's say CMP1. I'm just entering CMP1 serial. I'm gonna quickly install it on aircraft, just for the sake of the example. And I'm gonna create a CMP2 under the same aircraft, considering that they are the same component. Therefore, they need to have their own tracking for each one within the same airframe. And CMP2. So, all right. Sending it to. Okay, so in that case, I will now go back to the AD definition. So now we are not considering a migration. I'm just creating a new AD definition from scratch. So AD 1, 2, 3, 4 test CMP description related to two components within the same airframe. So here as an applicability text, you could write that this is applicable to CMP1 and CMP2, and you could even enter the serial numbers. Even though here it's simply text information, the real applicability is going to be at the second step. So let's consider that it's a recurring ADs and every 200 hours, let's say. All right, so I saved the general definition, and now I'm gonna focus on the applicable on menu and look for the component to which I want to track this AD. And it's because the system knows under which airframe the component is mounted that then you're gonna have your AD the way you wish, I guess. So here, let's have a look to, I'm gonna filter with the serial number directly. CMP serial 1 and 2. I can do multiple selection at once with the CTRL key, and I push the criteria that I need under the selected panel. Once I have the selected criteria available, I just hit the apply filter, and the system will show me the entries it found. So in that case, I can select all and create my instance. Done. So I just created one ND, and applicability has been set to the two components. So if we go back to it and have a look on that AD, either from this single menu, and I will also show you under the aircraft itself, but right from here, if I hit the console, I can now see that this AD is applicable to those two parts that are installed under the registration C-9. And if I double click on one of the entry, I can track the very specific details of the one that is related, in that case, to the CMP1, and have access to the live values of it. Answering your question, Kevin?
I was looking for migrating, so I already have it. Let's take a Magneto. There's a recurring AD on it. So we have it tracked in the AD manager already, but we were just tracking it against an airframe, and now we're going to need to track it against the
Oh,
component.
I see, sorry. Okay. So in that case, yeah, you're true. This is something that can happen. So you should find out your entry defined on the airframe at the beginning. So via the migration tool, you look for your AD airframe. So I will pick one randomly just to make you understand the concept. And even if you use, for example, let's check this AD here. Apparently, this instance, just make sure it's not supposed to be on a, this would be on a component. Well, let's take back my example with an AD airframe. Let's use that one. So imagine in your case, if you enter the AD you have in mind under that migration tool, you're going to have one entry, the one defined at your aircraft level. So same thing, prior to do this, you will make sure that the general aspect of it are still accurate. Once you are sure of it, you will be able to create an AD definition out of it. And once you have the AD definition, you can, of course, flag all the entries that you'd like to link manually. Since in your case, you have not flagged the serial number of the component, you're going to be able to open this general definition once it's available. So closing the migration tool, sorry. So we're going to keep in mind the AD0917. And from the AD definition, right there, you're going to consult it. Oops, sorry. You're going to edit it. Excuse me. And use your applicable on criteria filter to make the link to the component that you need. Okay, so one aspect of it for you, if you want to save one step, could be to make sure prior to migration that you have at least one link done with one of the two components. So at the end, once the definition is done, you're going to need to only attach it to the last one. Okay. And from there, you can search for the component you'd like to relate this AD to. By name, by model, by part number, etc. When you use the name, then the system prepare the subfilters according to the name you selected. So I know that for that component name CMP, I only have one part number and two serial number at the moment, etc., etc. So once you find the exact component you'd like to make a link to create an instance for, again, you apply your filter the way you need. You can combine several filtering options, of course. And once you have found the entry you want, you create the instance.
So if you link it to just a part number and you get a new serial number in the inventory, will it automatically apply that AD to that part number?
I have to check that. I'm gonna check that and come back to you because I know this is something we discussed in the past. I'm not sure it has been done this way now. Or I'm not sure it's already available, but I'm sure it's something we have in the pipe. So yeah, I'm gonna check that and come back to you with the answer, Kevin.
Okay, thank you.
Cedric, good morning. This is Sandra Dye.
Hi, Sandra. How are you?
How are you?
I'm very good, thanks.
Couple of questions. Number one, it seems to me that what the AD definition link is doing is very much like how an aircraft template works.
That's right. If you have
So,
managed all your ADs at the template level, it could be really more like easier to do the migration.
okay, all right. I kind of figured, but I wanted to be sure. With respect to the previous question, if you've got an AD that you have applied to an airframe and now you want to change that definition and apply it to a component, once you do that migration or do that change that you just showed us, what happens to the AD definition or the AD that was once applied to the airframe? Do you just change the applicability?
Well, I'm not sure to clearly understand your point. You mean that you have an AD that is after migration is going to be linked to any instance? Yeah, go ahead.
Let's say that there was a mistake and
Okay.
the AD was incorrectly applied prior to migration to an airframe rather than a component.
Yeah, so this is exactly why the preliminary step is important. You should make sure that all the ADs are related to the right instance at the first time. However, if it happens, you can still correct it, but for sure, if you missed it, you're going to create false instances based on your initial information.
Okay.
So this is why, we know that there are a lot of work for you to perform on a preliminary step. However, considering the change we did on the data model to make this feature available, this is the, let's say, the maximum we end up with to help you with that migration. So it's true that the very first step, and it's very crucial for you to make sure that initially all the links are the way they are supposed to be, and avoid to have too many mistakes, because well, at the end it will be time consuming for you to correct it post migration.
Okay. All right. And then finally, the not applicable capability, is that by airframe or can you use that at the template level as well?
The not applicable is per instance. So if you do have the general definition set, let me check that. Under the general definition, we don't have the provision to flag the whole AD definition as not applicable and to make it not applicable to every instances. No, it's per instance.
Okay, thank you so much.
Welcome. Any other questions? Wow, again, you need time, I guess, to digest and to try it, which, by the way, we sent out a newsletter, and for this version, and it's something that I already told to a lot of you guys, when we issue a major release, you should try at your best to deploy it at first under a test environment. This version will change your processes, I hope for the better, but if you are not analyzing the content prior to deployment, and if you do not communicate internally to your end users that a new version is coming, the very first day they're going to open this new release, it's going to be very difficult for them. So please take time to analyze. You are now aware that once you start using the new Adsb feature, you cannot revert back to the old. So this is why it's also interesting for you to have a test environment or a playground environment. From there, you could be able to touch it, to play with it, to do whatever test you need to do. And once you have your mind clear about it, and we are here to help answer your question, we can also provide you additional professional services to take over the migration step for you. But well, of course, feel free to ask. But again, my main warning here, and I guess you all get it now, is take time to analyze the content and to make sure it will be deployed the best way it can be. So I guess if anyone else has a question, I can continue. If not, keep in mind that you can shoot me an email, you can call me, and yeah, and we would be able to talk about your very specific details. Again, I know this is a general information. My main objective is for you to make sure that you are access now to that guide, that you will read it, and that you will be able to review this presentation in the future.
Cedric, Phil had sent a question in on via the
chat?
text there that could be applicable to us as well.
Can the same AD be entered more than once with different definition and time limits? For example, yep, Phil, this is doable. You can enter several times the same. Well, it won't be the same definition because you're gonna have the same AD number, but with different aspect. But the time limits of your AD, which could be different for the same AD number, if I understand well, does it is because the limit is different depending on the component to which it's related to? That's it? So for example, you have an AD 1234. That AD has a limit of 200 hours on a particular component, and the same AD 1234 has a limit at 150, for example, for another one. That's what you ask. Different by part number. Okay. So yeah, this is possible. Oops, no, sorry, no. On your case, no. 180 for us, the limit is the same at the definition level. So you only have the possibility to have one and exact same limit regarding the AD number. So on your case, you will have to enter twice the same AD, with different limits. So for example, here I have my AD number. Just a second, right there. Let's take this one, which is here for an interval of 200. And I will need to create the same AD number to isolate the other limit. And then I use the applicable on feature and go do the link on the related component that needs it. Let's say this part number here. And now my system will apply that AD on all those transponder installed on different aircraft. And I will do the same for the other AD right there. So here is why the applicability text field can be interesting. If you end up, because of what you need to do, having 2 times the same AD number, you could look at the applicability here to help you, well, analyze it or manage it. So this one is now open on 2 components. That's the one I did previously. If I need to open an additional applicability criteria, I go back to the applicable on and do the same thing as I showed you before. So to answer the question, if you are in that situation, you need to create 2 times the same AD number, because for us, the limit is supposed to be the same no matter what. But you're right, it's a business case that we could implement in the future. It's not yet available. Phil, is it answering your question? I guess it is, but please let me know. Perfect. All right. We have 2 minutes left. Does anyone has additional question? I guess not. So again, thank you all for being there this morning. Again, feel free to send me any specific questions you may have. I know that sometimes it's also not very comfortable to raise a question in front of everyone. So no worries. You can shoot me an email containing all your interrogation, and I'll be glad to help you with this step. But again, honestly, I know and we are really aware that it's going to take you a few days to make sure your data are quite accurate and consistent. But once this huge job is done, this feature will help you save a lot of time. It's also, considering the history of our customer, it's also possible for you to take this migration as an opportunity to sit back and take the time you never have to the possibility to invest to clean your database, because then the gain will be really huge. And also, yeah, I'd like to end this presentation by showing you that we redesigned the Adsb compliance report. So if you use that new feature, you will be able to have access to it from there. And it's been redefined, so now you can filter on different things right from here. You can check for only AD applicable to the airframe, only to the component, or both. If you have an AD link to a component, you can decide for which component you want to create a report for. Of course, you can keep all. So this is also something that can help you saving times. We heard all your feedbacks about our existing Adsb compliance report, which is really difficult to manage. So I'm just showing you what it is now, and we will be good to end the meeting. So the header at the top as usual, and then we have here the aircraft registration, the different ADs applicable on it, and all the information you expect from it. And you see as well that it's now under landscape format and no more under page. All right, so thank you all for being there this morning. I hope it will help you to prepare this big step for you, and feel free to reach me if you have any questions. Have a very, very nice day, everyone, and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Cedric.
Thank you, Evan.
Thank you all.